Okay, I have no real right to make a video tonight. I just got home. Uh, it's like after 9 p.m. I've been in Chicago the past couple days for work, just for a company-wide meeting thing, um, and I'm exhausted. We've been driving, some coworkers and I have been driving for the past 4.5 hours. Um, I have a ton of email to go through. Um, I actually have like 100 and some comments to reply to on my last video, which I'll eventually get to. Uh, but I just wanted to touch on the fact that today is 9/11. Um, I don't like how it feels like we've just moved on as a country and not. It seems like less and less each year we're not remembering the day like we used to. I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on my thoughts about that day. Um, I remember I was at work, around 7:30 in the morning. Coworker came in and said, "Did you hear what happened?" And we went online, and a plane had crashed into the World Trade Center. My first comment was the pilot drunk? Just kind of this knee-jerk reaction. And then we all know the story. The second plane hit the Pentagon. It was bad. It was a scary day. I remember, excuse me, I remember them telling us, try to get some work done. But we couldn't. We just all hovered around each other. Just, who's this? All of a sudden we kept hearing Osama bin Laden, this name, and all this crazy stuff. And they eventually left us out of work early, and I had to stop at, it's called Sam's Club. It's a place like Costco, to get some cat food. And the store was scarily, just frighteningly quiet. I had to put gas in my car. The gas station was frighteningly busy. I remember driving home, and not all the radio stations had the live feed. That day, I remember the emails started coming through. I started sending them to some of my best friends who I hadn't talked to in a long time. I was emailing my sister at work, who was telling me what was happening. Our internet was just slow as all hell. And we didn't have a radio or a TV at work that worked. So my sister was emailing me how she was hearing about people jumping out of the buildings, just how people were crying, whatever. I got home, and my sister and her husband actually were living with my parents for the summer while they were building their new house. And my sister had to go into town or something and asked me to babysit my nephew. My nephew Derek was 18 months old at the time. He's 8 years old now. He's going to be 9 at Christmas. And I remember turning off CNN because they started really jumping the gun with their stories. I turned off the news. I was never so happy to get home. And by home, this was my parents' house. And I turned on Teletubbies. At the time, Derek was into that show. And I just remember sitting there as our world exploded, in front of our very eyes. My sister was pregnant with my other nephew at the time, just a few months pregnant. And there I was with Derek, watching Teletubbies. Eventually, eventually we even turned that off. And I just sat on the floor with him. And I covered up with a blanket. I kind of had a blanket wrapped around me. And he had a little Fisher Price, we call it Village People. It was a little Fisher Price, our town people or whatever, car. And he had a car. Imagine this is my car. And he used to do this thing where he'd drive the car up and down my back like I was a big mountain. And we played, I was this mountain, and we played cars and village people, till his mom got home from work, or errands, or whatever she had done. And it was such a loss of innocence for me at that point. I knew my nephews, well, my nephew at the time and my unborn niece or nephew, would never know a world like I once knew. And I was right. I remember that night as a family, watching the coverage, seeing people jumping out of buildings, and the smoke and the ashes and whatnot. And it just seemed like a movie. A mania happened in my town of people rushing to the gas station. And eventually I drove home to where I live. And the gas station was closed, like at 8 o'clock at night. And it had dawned on me how it felt like summer just like that was over. It was cold. It was very dark. And I tried to go for a run to escape my thoughts. And it was the first time in this little town of mine where I went running, and usually I would run past the street lights in the dark. And it was the first time I'd ever gone running where I didn't feel safe. I remember running back and seeing every house had the TV on. And it just felt so scary and so lonely, and the internet was just really doggy, and I didn't want to go online just to, I don't know. I remember eventually turning the TV on late at night, and I just couldn't handle the sensationalism of it and the twist. And I remember I remember watching the BBC America. It seemed like they just had a better take on the events of the day, but I quickly turned that off. And I remember listening to Simon and Garfunkel, Bridge Over Troubled Waters, Imagine by John Lennon, Happy Christmas, War is Over, Love is Real, and Fragile by Sting. Those became my songs for the next few days. I immediately turned to that music. And I just sat there in front of my TV eventually, like the rest of those houses that I ran past. And I wept for the nation. I wept for my nephews. It's never been the same. And my biggest memory of all that is the innocence of playing cars with my nephew Derek, and how unconditional that was, and how real it all felt, and how innocent it was. And it's, the world has changed today. So those are my thoughts on 9/11. Yeah.